Hi there, I'm Chris Nicholson, a partner with Russell Reynolds in our clean tech and energy practice here in London. Thank you for joining us again for our Energy Matters video series, which, just to recap, is all about bringing investors and industrialists together to debate the big themes across decarbonisation and the energy transition more broadly. We're really excited about momentarily welcoming Francesco Starace, the CEO of Enel, onto our show. Francesco, as you will know, is the CEO of Enel. He's transformed the company to be one of the largest developers of renewable power globally and a world leader in the digitization of energy and innovation across the grid. Francesco kindly shares his views on the big themes across the sector, the right business model to drive change, and what he's most optimistic about in the sector moving forward. Really hope you enjoy the conversation.
Francesco, good morning and good afternoon with you.
Morning.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Our viewers and listeners were very excited about hearing more from you in the context of Enel and your leadership role for the company, taking them to a leader in power, renewables, digital energy over the last decade. So in the context of the world today, you've been evolving Enel over the last decade, and you've seen many different themes emerge and accelerate. What are you most optimistic about in the context of the energy transition?
I think where I am most optimistic is the fact that this transition is not just about energy, but it's a larger theme. So it's affecting in general the industrial development of many sectors. So it's not just an energy transition, but out of that it's spilling out into different sectors of the industry. Why that is good is because it enlarges widely the scope of electricity as we classically had defined in the past. So through this transition, we basically do two things. One, we decarbonize electricity, because this is now technologically convenient, not just advisable. But doing that, we reach a climate-friendly electricity, but also a cheaper and more reliable electricity in the pricing thing. And that makes electricity available and useful and convenient also for uses that were not conceivable before. You know, automotive is just one very large example, but there are others, heating and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be beneficial because through this, we will decarbonize additional segments in industrial activity, and we will contribute also to stabilize the economic cycle in a big way. So that is what I like very much about the transition. It's an inherent stabilization attribute.
And I suppose you've transformed Enel and to some degree the sector already in terms of growth in renewable capacity and changing the structure of the company. The energy transition and decarbonisation is very much more in the spotlight now than it was then. Is it more or less difficult to transform a company of the scale of Enel today than it was in the past?
I would argue that is more or less the same. So I don't think that, you know, transformation of companies is never really easier or more difficult, depending on the time in which it occurs. It's a question of, let's say, explaining the motivation of this transformation to the company and the employees, and making sure that everybody understands the objective and the benefit that we are going to gain from that. I don't believe that this is now easier or more complex than it was 10 years ago. Just depends on the way in which you project it. It's much more an issue of being clear and being honest about the aim, rather than, you know, waiting for times to be more in tune with you. It's never really fully the case.
And I guess a decade ago, you were evolving the company, building the supply chain to execute on power renewables at scale, and I'm sure there was lots of learning along the way as we move into digitized energy, into the broader decarbonisation outside of energy as a sector. there must be a whole host of different challenges. What do you think are the main blockers that we need to overcome?
I think the main difference, and therefore the difficulty that needs to be understood, is that while the first transformation was a transformation largely in control of the company itself. So the company decides to move out of fossil fuel into renewables, provided it does not turn the lights off. I mean, more or less, it's the company that does it because of its own decision and its own efforts, okay? But now in this case, if you look at the fact that the electrification of society is the next step, this cannot be done by the company. This is just something that needs to be done together with consumers, together with customers. So it actually, I argue, it's much more important what they decide to do rather than what the company can really contribute. I mean, we need to be making this easy, convenient, reliably, safe, but eventually the switch is their decision. So that's a big difference. The first decision was our decision. This decision is much more customers. So that's really the tricky part. How do you make it easy for them to decide that? And how can you help them in that? But eventually it's up to them. That's a completely different ballgame.
And thinking about that, that's a big theme within the transition.
Yeah.
Customer centricity, shifting from internally focused execution to the customer, and the other big themes clearly are around moving into the new technologies that are catalysts to accelerate decarbonization, the shift from I suppose a culture from being focused on profit to one that's more firmly focused on purpose, which I know you're a big advocate. These are all big seismic shifts for an organization, a large organization. What does it mean for leadership and culture? Do you see it as a very different set of definitions of success for leadership in today's world versus the past?
I think the answer is perhaps different in different companies depending on their mission and the sector in which they stand in. In our case, this is the utility sector is very much linked to society at large. You know, can you prosper in a society that is suffering? Not really. So can you do very well if you're out of sync with the society you live in and its expectations and outlook? No way. I mean, you could probably, if you had a different business and you didn't really materially change in if people are positive or negative. But in our case, I think the main, I would say, effort is from the management standpoint, understand where society is and where is it going, and be in sync with that. Because if you don't get that, and if you're not open to what really society, and when I say society, I really mean it. I mean, just not the industry, not just the commerce, not just the business, but also retail consumers. What exactly is that they look for, and what can you change about yourself to meet that requirement? That's, believe me, in our business, it's strangely relatively rare and new. We are a business that was just providing electricity because can people live without it? No. So do we care what they want, what they think about this? What is the view of it? No, they just switched. So we talk a lot about customers, but we don't know anything about them. And by the way, we don't know where society wants electricity to go. So to be in sync with that is the much more complicated thing we are to face today in terms of management structure and way of thinking of the people that work in this industry. The trip we made, you know, in changing from one technology to the renewable energy technology helped because it was already a big exercise of understanding of different things. This one is much more deep. It's much more challenging.
That challenges the model around hierarchy and structure and integration,
Yes.
the model of a company. And you and I have talked about this in different contexts. And clearly there are many stakeholders corporate stakeholders trying to participate in the energy transition and accessing the customer. What's your view on the fully integrated oil company or energy company playing that role versus something that's more focused? What's the right model?
I think that, like I said, in this case, the model is right or wrong depending on the time. And because what we are experiencing today is a tsunami of technology evolution across the value chain. So we've seen what happened to generation with renewables. We're seeing what happens to distribution networks when they digitize. We have not yet seen what happens when customers by the millions charge their cars, heat their homes all together, and what stresses this will provoke to the previous upstream segments, and how will value migrate across the value chain depending on the interplay between this technology evolution is really difficult to predict. So to bet on a segment of the value chain only means that either you have an incredibly strong capability to foresee the future in detail, or you expose your company to some risks because your bet might be right, but also wrong. And the other side of the coin is that your focus, if you want, makes everything simpler for you, your life. I mean, even your quality of life improves. At the end of the day, you don't have to worry about too many things, just one. I argue that maybe over time, it will clarify, that value will migrate and stabilize somewhere in the segment. I think that this transient will be longer than people think. It will be maybe a 20-year transient. And so our bet is that we shouldn't bet. We should get the whole value chain and manage it across this transition in order to be more safe and also capture value in all the pockets in which it's created. The side of the coin is that, of course, your life is more complicated and your stresses are maybe more, but we are here to suffer. As many times we have to remember that.
In that context and keeping the customer in mind, a big topic that we've been debating is around the big tech companies, the FAANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, their role in using their platform model to engage and win the customer, and then from there selling other services, one of which might be electricity. And clearly NLX has been very progressive in how it's moved and engaged in that way. Do you see that theme as a threat or an opportunity around partnership?
We have partnership, of course. When we went into the cloud, we partnered with the Amazon, because Amazon was at that time a very large cloud provider. But so we partner with them and we work with all of them in many different ways. Honestly, I think the value they create out of their customers is several times higher than what you can do with electricity. And then there is a second point that maybe is less fully understood, that the electricity market is quite a regulated business. So there is a lot of regulatory scrutiny, concern, interference, which is intrinsically against the nature of these companies. I know that this is maybe not, but they're not really super regulated animals. Okay, so the regulatory flavor of our market is maybe not the best environment for them. That is maybe an explanation, together with this relatively low margin when compared to what they used to have, that maybe this is not really the key market for them at this stage. And I argue whether it would be ever interested.
Thank you, Francesco. Appreciate the time. And we will all watch with interest as Enel navigates this next transition. Really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you, Chris, and congratulations for this initiative. I think it's really interesting.